The lake had always been my escape, away from the noise, away from the HOA drama, away from the chaos of neighbors who thought they ran the world. My cabin sat quietly by the water, a piece of land I owned outright, passed down from my grandfather who built it with his bare hands. The cabin wasn't fancy, but it was mine. The lake was my peace, my fishing spot, my sunrise view. But of course, peace is the one thing an HOA cannot stand to see someone else enjoying. And sure enough, they decided to go after the one thing they thought would break me, my water supply. It started with a letter, a bright orange paper taped to my cabin door, stamped with notice of violation. According to them, my dock didn't meet HOA aesthetic standards. My boat lift was unapproved construction, and even the color of my cabin siding was non-compliant with community guidelines. I laughed when I read it because my cabin wasn't even in their HOA jurisdiction. My land predated the entire subdivision, but HOAs, especially ones run by people who think they're royalty, don't care much for facts. They want control, and if they can't get it legally, they try intimidation. A week later, my tap water slowed to a trickle. At first, I thought it was a plumbing issue inside the cabin. I checked the lines, the filters, the well pump. Everything was fine. That's when I drove down the dirt path that led toward the HOA's section of the neighborhood, and I saw it. Two HOA board members, one of them being none other than Karen herself, standing near the main shutoff valve by the road, padlock in hand, laughing like they'd just pulled the prank of the century. They thought they'd cut me off from my own water. What they didn't know, and what made me grin so hard my cheeks hurt, was that my grandfather had been the one to install the original water system in this area. Back when these homes were nothing but empty lots, he had helped design the shared plumbing infrastructure that fed water across the subdivision. And when he deeded the land to me, he also left me something else: legal ownership of the main water easement and the entire master shutoff line. In other words, the HOA's plumbing ran through my property. They had just cut their own throats without realizing it, but I wasn't about to let them know that right away. No, I had a better idea. That night I walked the line, checked the valves, and set my own lock on the main shutoff, the one that controlled the supply to every single HOA home in the neighborhood. The next morning, bright and early, I heard the chaos begin. Phones ringing, neighbors shouting, garden hoses sputtering, sprinkler systems failing, toilets not flushing. Within hours, Karen and her little board were in full meltdown mode. They had tried to punish me by cutting my water, and instead I now controlled every drop that flowed into their sinks and bathtubs. And believe me, I didn't keep that power a secret. I strolled down to their emergency board meeting. Yes, they called one within 24 hours and stood right at the back with a smile. "Having a little water trouble?" I asked. Karen's face went red. She stammered something about unauthorized tampering, and how the HOA was going to fine me thousands of dollars for interfering with community resources. That's when I pulled out my folder: deeds, maps, easement rights, paperwork signed decades ago by the county, proving the entire water system belonged to my property line, not theirs. The silence in that room was priceless. Board members who'd been so loud a day earlier now sat frozen. They had no power here. In fact, if they wanted their water back, they had to deal with me. I could see Karen shaking with anger, but she couldn't argue with stamped county records. And just to twist the knife, I told them exactly what I expected. First, every violation notice against my cabin was to be dropped. Second, I wanted a signed agreement that no future HOA member would attempt to harass me or interfere with my property rights again. And third, an official apology letter delivered to me in writing acknowledging their mistake. Of course, they didn't want to do it. Karen started yelling, demanding the sheriff get involved, demanding I be arrested. But that didn't work either. The sheriff knew me well. He'd fished my lake plenty of times, and when I showed him the documents, he just shook his head and said, "Looks like the HOA has been messing with things they don't own." That was the end of it. Within a week, I had my apology letter. The HOA board backed off completely. And just for the record, I didn't keep their water off. I'm not cruel, but they needed to know exactly where they stood and where I stood. From that day forward, every time Karen drove past my cabin, she couldn't look me in the eye. She knew I held the line, literally. My cabin still stands, my lake still sparkles at sunrise, and my water, let's just say it flows just fine, because in the end it turns out I wasn't the one who needed the HOA. The HOA needed me, and they'll never forget it.